On today's Monday recap episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, Cody and I look at where the game was lost for the Houston Texans. Injuries. MetLife did not go hand in hand on Sunday as CJ Stroud is now in concussion protocol along with other injuries.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, Texans fans, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers to a Monday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy, Hickman, and the man with the plan, Sports Illustrated's own credential media member, Cody Davis.
I'm sad.
Sad day. Sad Sunday as we were recording. Sad Monday for a lot of people that had the time to watch that game. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first-time deposit match up to $100 as we look and get into today's show. Are the Texans postseason hopes done? Man, 2 weeks ago it was MVP and winning the division. Now are the hopes for the playoffs over with? Cody and I will look at how the game was lost, and I think mainly was the first half of this Texans team. But we open up today's show with the most concerning, the most probably breathtaking when you saw the hit on the field, the injuries to Nico Collins. The Texans suffered 5 injuries to key players, including Will Anderson, Nico Collins. So we'll talk about that. But CJ Stroud is in concussion protocol. A brutal hit, Cody, listeners and viewers. Kind of reminded me and put me in the mindset of that Tua hit from last year. Was the head hit the ground so hard, his body just, it was just, man. Luckily, he walked off on his own strength, but he is in concussion protocol.
Yeah, and that's the worst part about it, which is the biggest thing about this game. First of all, John, to your point, there was 5 total injuries that the Houston Texans sustained to very key players: CJ Stroud concussion, Nico Collins calf, Blake Cashman hamstring, Will Anderson ankle, and Tavier Thomas. Oh man, hamstrings in the city of Houston does not go well. And Tavier Thomas went down with a knee injury. All 5 of those guys did leave early. John, this is a team that entered this Week 14 contest without Tank Dell, Titus Howard, and Dalton Schultz. But, of course, the biggest name on this injury report is C.J. Stroud. Yeah. To your point, took a hard hit by defensive lineman Quentin Williams midway through the fourth quarter. Head bounced off of MetLife Stadium's turf. And, John, to me, I thought that it should have been an illegal hit penalty call on Quentin Williams at the time, at least from what I saw.
Rougher than passer.
Exactly, rougher than passer. But the one thing that I love about Coach DeMeco Ryans, he does not make any type of excuses.
Yeah, on the hit with CJ, we got to block it better. Right? We can't allow them, to get back to our quarterback. We have to block it better up front.
I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. However, John, a concussion injury, you might as well already call it. CJ Stroud will possibly miss next week game against the Tennessee Titans, along with Blake Cashman, because the one thing that I've been preaching about ever since you and I have been reporting on hamstring injuries, without a shadow of a doubt, you are missing at least a minimum of 2 weeks, i.e. just take a look at Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz went down with a hamstring injury in the game against the Jacksonville Jaguars and missed the previous 2 games. And that was with him actually practicing this past Wednesday. But CJ, it doesn't look good. Speedy recovery to him. But once again, injuries continues to be a major point for the Houston Texans in 2023.
So I definitely want to start off saying a couple of things. Speedy recovery to all of the players that suffered an injury heading into this week and leaving this game out. And we'll get into this in the second segment. I'm not placing the blame on injuries for this game, nor the MetLife Stadium. But these injuries, man, I don't even want to talk about it too long. But I look at the injury to CJ Stroud. He is your number one guy. Will Anderson goes out with an ankle injury. and hopefully he's able to bounce back next week. We don't know the significance of the injury yet. He's not returning back. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but the one thing that scares me about this, Will Anderson has been dealing with an ankle injury over the last couple of weeks, and that's part of the reason why they've been kind of load managing him coming into this game.
Yeah. But he's the top guy. CJ is the top guy. We know Tank Dell is out for the year. Nico Collins goes down after getting his 1,000 yards on his career. Congrats to Nico. But he's a top guy. Blake Cashman is a starting linebacker. Who else am I? Dalton Schultz is your starting tight end. Brevin Jordan, I thought, looked good today in this time, but we'll talk about that. But a lot of these top guys, top guys. And the issue right now for Houston is how many times can you continue to replace some of these top guys for the time being? Right? Shaq Griffin was a guy that was brought in to replace Tavierre Thomas, and then Desmond King to replacing Carson, a replacement. And they've been able to sustain, right? Kendrick Green, Josh Jones, we know about the offensive line. But what makes this team go, the 7 games that they've won this year, how are you going to replace not having Tank Dell and Nico Collins? Boy, am I going to talk about that. How are you going to replace not having Will Anderson to help stop the run? How are you going to replace that? That's the question, I think, for the rest of the week. How does Davis Mills have another legacy game in him? Is that possible? Can Davis Mills go to Nashville and bring home a dub?
You did last year.
If he does that, the conversation about the best backups in the NFL got changed. But no, seriously, how is concussion protocol for CJ? And that was a tough hit. I wouldn't be surprised if he missed 2 weeks.
You say 2 weeks? I don't think 2 weeks, but he's definitely not suiting up next week against the Texans.
I don't think he's suiting up. I don't think he's suiting up unless that hit was just really protocol and it wasn't as bad as it seemed from looking on TV, but it was pretty bad. And then Nico with the hamstring, he gets to 1,000 and he goes down. So, well, let's talk about where the game was lost coming up on the other side, but the concussion protocol for CJ on top of the other injuries, it's tough. But did the injuries steal the show? Were the injuries the reason for the loss? Before we move on, Cody, yes or no?
No.
Can't wait to talk about it. Right now, for some of you and some of us lazies that don't necessarily want to leave the house, the couch, because we've been working all week. This is our first time being lazy. We want to get something to snack on while we watch the game. We want to order some wings. Maybe want to order some pizza for the family. You just don't want to leave. Well, that's where the DoorDash app comes in handy. And right now, they can give you an offer. They want you to take advantage of it, right? This is for the family. 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order. Just download the DoorDash app on your phone, or you can go online. But it's better to download the app and get 50% off. That's right, 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. When you download the DoorDash app and enter promo code LOCK23, that is LOCKED23. Again, the promo code is LOCK23. Subject to change, terms apply. Welcome back, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. A Monday that Cody and I were expecting to be a victory Monday. Cody had bust out the crab legs. We thought we was going to eat some dubs, right? We thought that's how everything was going to kick off, but from the moment the game kicked off at MetLife Stadium, it was just not good for the Houston Texans. I mean, in the first half alone, we look at a team that was 1 of 7 on third downs, 2.2 yards per play, -4 passing yards, 3 sacks allowed. They did run the ball fairly well with 67 rushing yards, 6 punts from Cameron Johnston. Noah Brown combined with Robert Woods, they both combined for a -2 receiving yards on 5 targets. And so this is where we start. Where was the game lost? Number one, the impact of losing Nico Collins that early threw the entire offense out. And one of the things that we talked about this week was how can Houston bounce back without having no Tank Dell? What can their game plan look like, and how can they get more from other guys? Remember that conversation, Cody?
Yes, sir.
We both mentioned. Well, I mentioned Brevin Jordan, who again I thought he had a fairly decent day, all things considered. As a matter of fact, he was the number one receiving threat for CJ today during this game. But I called upon Noah Brown. Didn't get nothing from him. Did not get nothing from him. And I think for the most part of the game, especially when Nico Collins went down, you saw Sauce Gardner, who I think coming into this game, he heard all the talk. Sauce Gardner had a phenomenal game. I got to give credit where credit is due. But Noah Brown gave Houston nothing. Robert Woods, the guy that I had a problem with that contract, and by no means am I hating on him getting this money, but the contract Houston gave him in the offseason before free agency really kicked off, I've always had an issue with it. And boy, was today the biggest. This is why. No Nico, no Tank Dell, no Dalton Schultz, and none of these guys gave C.J. Stroud a chance. None of these guys gave C.J. Stroud a chance. Drop passes, not being able to get separation. And by the way, we'll talk about this before we move on. This was everything the Jets wide receivers were able to do for a struggling quarterback, and Zach Wilson, who threw for 300 yards. And you mean to tell me none of this was able to get, done for C.J. Stroud? Was nobody able to help him out? But it still goes to one guy. We talked last week about what would happen if Bobby Sloyd moved on. And I said, boy, does he need to stay? This was one of the most, if not the most, I'm going to say the most disappointing game from a play caller standpoint all season. You're going up against a tough defense. Your offensive line at this point is struggling with the likes of Quentin Williams, Jermaine Johnson, and that deep front. They're getting pressure on your quarterback, and we're still seeing a lot of these long, drawn-out plays when both Nico and Tank Dell is not on the field. So you're hoping for some of these down-the-field connections to happen, and it's not going to happen because the chemistry. Noah Brown did it for 2 games, and guess who's on the field at that time? Woods has not consistently shown to be an impact player for this offense. And I thought the play caller from Bobby Sloyd having all week and understanding the type of defense you're going up against, the weather you were going up against, right? The field you were going up against. At no point did I feel like CJ was put in a good position. And at no point did I feel like the offense was put in a good position. And to make matters worse, their last 3 plays in their first half, they started all of those drives were started inside their 10 yards. So they were already going up against adversity, not good field position, the worst of good field position. And at no point did I feel like the offense was put in a good position. Did I feel like CJ was put in a good position? At no point. And I give a bulk of the blame to Bobby Sloyd. I give a bulk of the blame to those receivers who. Why should we sit back and say, boy, man, 2 receivers that has barely getting any playing time this year because of the youth should be more of an impact players than the 2 veterans. We haven't seen a lot of Xavier Hutchinson snaps. We hadn't seen a lot of John Mechie snaps, which is what we've been wanting to see. But I left that game thinking, oh my gosh, take them out, take the vets out, and let the young bucks go. And that's the exact opposite of what I thought should have happened. I'm sorry, I did not mean to take over. I just want to give you guys these numbers. Houston, Texas, I think had like 7 straight punts. They were not able to really establish anything offensively, which is why I think the game was lost. Your defense held the team to 0 points at the halftime, and you were not able to take advantage of that. C.J. Stroud, 10 of 23 on the game, 91 yards, sacked 4 times. Devin Singletary, 13 carries, 65 yards on the ground, 5 yards per carry, 1 TD. Damian Pierce, 4 carries, 9 yards, 2.3 carries. Brevin Jordan, 3 for 35. Nico Collins, 1 for 13. Xavier Hutchinson, 2 for 15. Noah Brown, 0 for 0. Robert Woods, 1 for -2. Noah Brown and Robert Woods combined for 8 targets leaving the game.
Well, you are hot. First off, since you focus on the offensive side of the ball, I'm gonna look at the defensive side of the ball. But before I get to that, this is where I have an issue with Bobby Sloyd, because I want to give him the benefit of the doubt that the reason why we saw him call such a terrible game was because he really didn't know how to play with the weather. As we all know, it was bad, it was terrible. And John, all three levels on the offensive side of the ball, from the backfield to the offensive line to the wide receiving core, was just terrible. This was by far the worst offensive performance that we saw out of the Houston Texans all season long. The offensive line, they looked terrible. They gave up 4 sacks and several hits to CJ Stroud. That's why we had to open up this show talking about Stroud being in concussion protocol. Your backfield did not give you much. By the way, later on in the week, we got to have this conversation about whether or not Devin Singletary has finally taken a hand at RB1. I only said that because I believe for the very first time since he was drafted by the Houston Texans, Dameon Pierce had less than 10 snaps. I counted 6 for the entire game, but we're going to wait until the rest of the stats come out. But I think he had less than 10 snaps in this game. However, going back to, I feel like I want to give the offense an excuse because there was a moment, I believe, early on in the first quarter where CJ Stroud tried to connect with Noah Brown, what looked like could have been like a 30-40 yard completion, but you can tell he dropped the ball due to the ball being slippery because of the rain. However, however, the one thing that I said I love about Coach DeMeco Ryans, he does not make any excuses.
Yeah, we tried to run the ball, right? We had some ops there. Still mix it up. Think guys, the weather wasn't bad enough where you couldn't throw the football, right? It wasn't that bad of a rain. But we had some ops there. We just didn't make the plays.
You heard Coach DeMeco Ryans. It wasn't that bad of a rain. And this is why I have the biggest issue with Bobby Sloyd in his play calling, because sometimes I feel he doesn't believe what he truly have on the offensive side of the ball. Because I felt like even though from what we were seeing, the weather, how bad it was, he still could have utilized CJ Stroud and that offense better than what we saw. However, John, I think this game was lost simply due to the fact that they let, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, and I feel like I want to throw up, that they let Zach Wilson get comfortable early on in this game. Now, let me preface my statement by saying this. From the outside looking in, over the last 3 weeks, we've seen the turmoil going on in New York. Go back 3 weeks ago, he had a terrible game against the Buffalo Bills. He get benched for 2 games. Then, leading up for this week, he is inserted back into the starting lineup. I came into this game thinking that Zach Wilson was going to have a decent performance, only because I don't know what it is, but when the quarterback gets benched and he comes in, at least for the next 2 to 3 games, they play decent football. We've seen it several times here in the city of Houston over the last 2 years with Davis Mills. I understand that and I get it. However, to allow Zach Wilson, out of all quarterbacks, Zach freaking Wilson, throw for 301 yards while going 27 of 36 with not 1, but 2 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. I couldn't believe it. This was worse than when they let Desmond Ridder go off on them a couple weeks ago. And I say this is worse only because at least Desmond Ridder is somewhat of a decent quarterback at his best. Zach Wilson has been terrible since the very first day he got drafted into the NFL. By the way, I already told you how many passing yards the Houston Texans gave up. 301. 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Coming into this game, in the 10 games that he started prior to playing against the Houston Texans, the man averaged 194 yards with 7 interceptions. You telling me a defense led by Coach DeMeco Ryans, a defense that had John Grenard, Will Anderson, Derek Stingley Jr., Steven Nelson. I'm mentioning all the guys that we've been singing their praises on that defensive side of the ball throughout the whole entire game. You telling me you couldn't get not one interception. Now I understand that they did have that one turnover, and we thought that's when the game was going to flip in favor for the Texans. However, what did the defense allow Zach Wilson to do after that fumble? And the Texans, credit to their offense, did capitalize on that. What did they do? They went out there and scored another touchdown to make the game. I think it was 21, if I'm not mistaken, to 6. Mm-hmm. Come on, man. This is what frustrates me about the Houston Texans.
This is after Matt Amendola missed the field goal.
Yeah, after Matt Amendola.
Point out the touchdown. That's what I mean. The PAT.
But this what has frustrated me the most about the Texans this season. They play either up or down to the level of their competition. And for us to sit here and read and hear Zach Wilson had one of his best career games, man, I'm sick to my stomach, man. Plain and simple. I just got to be truthful.
I think you have every right to. I think the fans that were watching at home has every right to. This was an opportunity. The Jags lost, the Browns lost. This was a golden opportunity for the Houston Texans today. And I think, again, I'm just setting it up for what we're going to talk about next. And I think that it's in jeopardy now. This was 300 yards, 7 of 15 on converting downs between third and fourth downs. In that second half, Zach Wilson put on a massive performance.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know I have my feelings about that young man, and I think he's the worst starting quarterback this year. I've said that going into it, and he has proved me right so far. But I have to give credit what credit is due. That young man went out there and had one of his best games of his career. But to have it against the Texans for the second time this season, we're looking at a subpar quarterback have a career day.
Third time. Well, Bryce Young, I don't want to. He had a career fourth quarter. Desmond and Zach had career games.
I could live with the Bryce Young because I know what he can be once Carolina get their situation together. But Desmond Ritter and Zach Wilson, come on, man. You're looking at two quarterbacks that shouldn't even be starting this year.
It may have not been a fun Sunday for Texan fans out there, but you can still have fun throughout the week. And that's what Prize Picks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You're not battling thousands of other players like pros and sharks. You pick the more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. Sit back and watch the winnings roll in. With basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from Specials League. A league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at 10.5 combo of 3-point made and receptions. More than, less than on that. And do you want to play alongside Prize Picks favorite players like rapper Meek Mill or comedian Andrew Schultz? You can now find the community plays under the promo tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Go to prizepicks.com or download the app on your phone. Prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that is LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Just download the Prize Pick app on your phone or go online. Before we close out today's show, guys, are the Texans' postseason hopes done? And hopefully you guys have stuck around to this point. Please let us know how you feel in the comments. Let us be true. Don't get you blocked by YouTube. But if you're following and watching, subscribing on YouTube, drop it in the comments. If you're not, please subscribe, like, and then comment on how you feel regarding the Houston Texans playoff hopes right now. Are they done? No. Now, with a loss today, I was looking at a metric. They have a 40% chance of now making it, but I think because of Indy losing, that's what I meant to say. Indy losing, the Jags lost. Some things are working out in their favor. Mm-hmm. It's imperative that they win out against the Colts. They got to beat the Colts one more time. They got to beat the Titans twice, I think. Actually, I think the Houston Texans got to win out, and that's going to be tough. The Browns defense is crazy. Is that who they play next?
No, they play Tennessee next.
Play Tennessee. I'm sorry, Tennessee's next. That's a winnable game with Davis Mills. The Browns is not. So hopefully CJ Stroud is back for that. That's going to be at home, the Browns game. But I still think they got a shot.
I don't know. To be honest with you, John,
that's fair point, because
I really don't know. And
300 yards
to Zach Wilson. And look, it all depends on.
Y'all made my daughter sick.
She was crying before we started. But I really don't know whether Texans playoff hopes are at this point because I think it all depends on injuries. Starting with CJ Stroud. John, let's say for the sake of the argument, you're right. It's a bad concussion if CJ Stroud misses both games. I don't know if the Texans can squeeze 2 games in the absence of CJ Stroud. Yes, I understand they're playing against Tennessee, but when I look at Tennessee, I'm also looking at whether or not Will Anderson Jr. is going to be available for that game. Because if he's not, you're going up against Derrick Henry. And I understand Derrick Henry is no longer King Derrick Henry like he was over the last 3 years. However, that is still a dangerous running back, and we know what Derrick Henry can do once he get into a zone. And for them, for the sake of this argument, the potential of them playing the Tennessee Titans without one of their best run stopper in Will Anderson Jr., it's going to be hard for the Texans to go in Tennessee and try to win that game.
It's going to be hard for the Texans to. They're going to be down some top players.
Of course.
The conversation this week, which is after talking about what is Nico, is he whatever. There's no wide receiver I trust right now if Nico's not on that field.
And that's another guy that I'm looking at. And then when you take a look at guys like Nico Collins, the potential of playing without CJ Stroud, you're not going to have Tank Dell, the possibility of whether or not Dalton Schultz is going to come back. And if he does come back, what is the likelihood he's going to be 100%? Then you're going up against one of the best defensive teams in the league in the Cleveland Browns. So I just don't know where the Texans playoff hopes stand at this point. And what makes me even more frustrated about this loss, this is a team, if they would have taken care of business in New York, they would have been tied with the Jacksonville Jaguars at 8-5, which meaning their playoff chances would have been a lot better today than it is versus them taking this loss in New York, man. Once again, this is just a terrible loss that the Houston Texans sustain, and I don't see how they can overcome this one, man.
That is the third time we've said that this year. And these are the games you are expecting a young, good team, a playoff hopeful team to pull out. Mm-hmm. This is the Atlanta Falcon game. This is the Carolina game. This is the New York Jets game where you are favorite coming into the game. This should be a win for you. And yet and still, career day for Desmond Ridder. You allow the Panthers their only win on the season and career day for I think I got brunch with your best friend Zach Wilson.
This was one of his career days. Oh my God.
Career moment. Y'all better make sure y'all listen to the Locked On Texans this week.
This make my head hurt, man.
Make sure that you are subscribed, you're liking, and make sure that you comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube under Locked On Texans. Give me a follow on X, John_Hickman12, and follow the Locked On Texans YouTube page as well. I think y'all need to make sure y'all tap in this week. We're gonna have some fun. We have some fun this week because this is unacceptable.
It really is. But as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at Cody Davis _24. Once again, that's Cody COTYDAVIS _24. John, I think the silver lining to all this is probably the first time this year we had a recap like this. So I mean that is a silver lining because last year all of our recaps was like this, but this one hurts. This one hurts.
Let me tell you why it's different. This was a playoff game. This is the game you make a push for something that's attainable that you haven't done since the 24-0 meltdown. This was a moment that you should have pulled out stops to dominate in this game. just like the Falcons, just like the Carolina Panthers. Until tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen.
Peace.